Parker, and I'm an AARP volunteer here on Oahu. On behalf of Ualu Leaf Cafe at Windward Community College, Kalnoa Senior Services on Maui, and AARP Hawaii, thank you very much for tuning in this evening. Tonight's Fast, Healthy, and Ono cooking demonstration will focus on learning how to make a molten lava cake, a flourless chocolate cake. We believe all things in moderation. So for this particular recipe, portion control is key, and that will integrate nicely into a healthy lifestyle. AARP is a nonprofit member organization for people 50 and older, but what we do for everyone. We do hope this series will help you learn techniques to build or maintain a healthy lifestyle. To quickly go over the Zoom controls, which I'm sure you guys could all do this lesson for me, is up at the top or up at the bottom. If you hover with your mouse, you'll see the function ribbon. So we're not going to be using chat today, except if you have any technical concerns, that's what you would put in the chat. So chats for technical concerns only. We're not going to be using the raised hand feature today. And the Q&A is the one we'll be using for any questions that you may have. So please be sure to click on the Q&A button on your function ribbon, type in your question, and then click enter, and we'll be sure to get that. We're not going to be entertaining questions for the first 15 minutes to allow the chef to really get into what he's doing without interruption. After that, yes, we'll break in every now and then. Also, I'd like to mention if you are on Facebook, you'll use the comments section for your questions. You may notice, I'm not seeing it right now on my screen, but the closed caption live transcription is going probably to be enabled. And so when you see that, if you would prefer not to use the live transcription, then you'll see really beside the Q&A, there'll be a little button that will say live transcription. So you just press that and then press hide subtitles, and the subtitles will go away. I know a lot of you do appreciate having those subtitles, so we'll just leave them there. We'll get those on for you as quickly as we can. And I think that, I should also mention the side-by-side view, because Chef is great at giving us like a full-on view and then the overhead view. So for you to be able to see those equally on your screen, if you look when he comes on, between the two screens he has, you will see a line going on your screen top to bottom. What you want to do is grab onto that line with the left click of your mouse, and you can slide it either way to make one side bigger, one side smaller, have them both equal. Personally, I kind of like to have them both equal. Entirely up to you. And of course, the big thing is we have two prizes today. So we'll be drawing for those two prizes. Dave will be, he's AARP volunteer helping us out today too. Dave will be going into the chat and he will private chat you if you are selected to win one of these prizes. Please be sure to respond to him so that you can get your prize, because we do need to know where to send it to. So please, if you get a chat from Dave, be sure to answer it. Without further ado, I would like to say it's my absolute pleasure to reintroduce Chef Dan Swift, who's been doing this series for us. And Chef, I have to be honest with you, I've enjoyed every single class you've done, but this one I've been really looking forward to. So, I lost my screen. So anyways, over to you, Chef. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bev. I appreciate that. And yes, I'm responsible for the pushing of a cheat day of sorts. So as Bev mentioned, the key, I think, when you're approaching items that you might have eaten more of earlier in life, I'm trying to cut back a little bit on the carbs currently too, is just moderation in the portion size. So tonight we'll go through some of the basics to make this classic molten chocolate cake. It's actually really, really simple, and it's pretty fast as well. And then there's a couple other tricks that you can do along the way to make it even healthier. So you don't need to necessarily serve it with ice cream in addition to the chocolate molten cake itself and things like that. So we'll go through some of those substitutions, but the ingredients are simple. And we've been at this now, I guess, we're coming up on a year. We've got a couple baking segments in June, and then we'll have reached our 1-year mark. So thanks to everyone for joining us. And if you're joining us for the first time, we hope you enjoy what we're going over tonight. So I have the setup here for what we need at home. You can use, as you know, if you've watched the show, just a simple toaster oven. You can use a regular oven for this as well. It can be convection or conduction. Doesn't really matter. You do need a burner or a microwave. You could probably melt the butter and the chocolate as well. So there's a couple different ways to approach that, and a bowl to mix it in. And that's about it, basically. But there are a couple keys I've written down here to success when it comes to making molten chocolate cake. There's a few approaches to it, and I'll talk about those kind of as we're going through it. But probably the number one thing is to make the batter in advance if you can. I'll show you the one that we're going to make fresh. It'll be a little thinner, and it can be used right away. It just depends on the vessel you're baking it in. So if you're planning to do it in a bottomless one like you would do in a restaurant, then you would try to make the batter in advance because it sets up a little bit. This one doesn't use flour. You could use flour, but the trick with cornstarch, or the advantage to cornstarch in this particular case, or tapioca or some other starches, they're a little bit finer. So you don't get any chalkiness to it. So that's an advantage that you would get. So we don't normally use flour, but if it's all you have at home, you can do it. A lot of people wouldn't notice the center that's basically an underbaked cake being a little bit chalky. Some people might, but most people probably would not. Use the correct pan. I'll show you a couple different options tonight. This could be done in a larger pan or pot or ring mold as well. But if you want that runny center, you're best to do it in small individual size ones. Maybe one up to 2 people would be appropriate as well. And then basically underbaking it. That's all this is. It's an underbaked cake. And with the elimination, as I mentioned, of the flour and the substitution of cornstarch, that raw batter that's warm inside hasn't fully set. It oozes out when you break into the cake. So the key is really in the timing. And that's going to be our challenge tonight, and will be your challenge at home. So you may need to practice it a couple times to get it perfectly correct for what you're looking for, depending on the dish or the vessel you're baking it in. And then lastly, serve it immediately. You don't want to do a flourless cake or a cake that you're under baking and then let it cool all the way down and the batter sort of sets, but it's raw, and then serve it. So this is designed to be served immediately upon coming out of the oven. So if things work out well tonight, I'll pop one in a few minutes so that it's ready close to the end of the 30-minute show, and we should be able to break that open and plate it and see it run out. If I were to overbake it, then it would be set and we wouldn't get the batter out of the middle. If it's underbaked, then I wouldn't be able to remove it without it falling apart. So it is a little tricky in that regard, but overall, the ingredients are simple, the techniques are simple. It's just that timing issue at the end that we have to worry about. So in terms of setting up the pans or what you're baking in, normally in a restaurant, I had the pleasure of working at Roy's in Seattle in 97, 98. And this is a dessert that, I mean, he sells all the time. He's probably made this dessert as popular or as famous as any restaurant. And we use ring molds. So it's basically bottomless molds that are then lined with parchment paper. So I'll cut a strip of paper and show you how to do that. And we just line it with that. The batter goes inside. And then when you put it on the plate, you remove the ring and then you unwrap the paper and the cake is right there, because it's fragile and you don't want to be bouncing it around. You have to be careful with it. So that is one technique. There's all different sizes. Here's a smaller one. I've got 3 sizes here, large, medium, and small. I'm going to do a large one in the oven when we start here in about 7 minutes. And I'll fill all 3 of these and get them in. But if I were to leave them in the same amount of time, the large one would be on the runnier side. The small one might be cooked all the way through. So you want to make sure that it's consistent. But if you do have ring molds, that's great. You can use those, or you can pick them up somewhere. But if you don't, you can easily just use a souffle cup. Any size would work. Anything that's oven proof and works in the oven would work fine. Here's a little ramekin. This is like a souffle cup that would really be something that you would serve at least 2 people. You could probably get up to 4 people out of a dish this size. So this would take probably 12 ounces of batter, would come up a little bit and then be served immediately. And people would spoon it out onto their plate. So if you want the individual one, always go with something a little bit smaller. If you want to get fancy and try to plate it and lift it off and have it ooze out, then you could use the ring mold. So you can also, of course, turn these upside down and take it off. What you want to do then is grease it. And sometimes a little bit of sugar will also help it unmold really easily. And that way you can just turn it upside down, it'll pop right out, and then scoop it and it'll pour the batter out of the center. So those are the approaches to the different types of pans that you use. I have some set up here. And like I said, I just use a sheet of parchment paper and I cut a strip depending on the height of the ring. Some of the rings are smaller, depends on how tall I want it to bake. I go a little bit over the rim of the metal ring itself. So I just cut a couple strips in this case with my parchment paper. It's just simply wrapped up like this and then dropped inside of the mold. So that's all there is to that. And what I would do normally is take a piece of parchment or wax paper, or nonstick aluminum, or just spray your pan. If you have a nonstick pan, that works great as well, but that makes the cleanup a little bit easier. So the ring molds are placed on a piece of parchment that I did also spray as well. So those are ready to go. I just set those aside right there. And then really quick, the ingredients, and then we can jump into questions and I'll start the process of making the actual batter. So the ingredients are really simple. You've got eggs and you've got egg yolks. So in this case, we've got 4 whole eggs. They're large. We've got 4 egg yolks, 3/4 of a cup of sugar, about 1/4 of a cup of the cornstarch, 1 cup of chocolate, and 3/4 of a cup of butter. This can be salted or unsalted. People on the dessert side these days are tending to put a little bit more salt in the desserts themselves. So that's up to you. You can, if you have salted butter at home, that works great. If you have unsalted butter, you can use that as well, or margarine, or substitute some other fat like that. That would be a little bit on the healthier side if you're watching your cholesterol. But the salt content would be up to you to add or not add at the end. So the other thing I would say, you could shift to egg beaters if you were making this and you wanted to use just egg beaters or something that's an egg substitute. Egg beaters about 99% egg whites, so you could use egg whites as well. You don't get the emulsification or the richness, but it does make it a lot healthier. So with a margarine instead of a butter, egg beaters instead of eggs, you can still end up with a cake that's pretty good quality at the end. And you could also even reduce your sugar content by at least probably 2/3 because you have some sugar in your chocolate already. So I'm just heating up the pan here and I'm going to add the butter. Nice and soft. You don't want it too hot. That's why I took it off the heat. I just want to make sure that I melt it. And there's a couple approaches to this when you're making chocolate or a ganache or dealing with heat and or hot butter and chocolate. You can do a double boiler, or the method that I'm showing you tonight is more direct heat. You just have to be really careful because chocolate is kind of temperamental and you want to make sure that you're not overheating it and burning it. It'll burn really quickly. So looking at the clock, it's about 12 after. I have a large one here. I can put this here for you guys to see. And I filled it about halfway to the top of the ring. And I'm going to pop that in the 350-degree oven and hope that at about 12 minutes, it'll be where we want it to be for our plating. So I've got the butter melting here. And if there's questions, Bev, or I'm not sure if Dave's taking the questions tonight, but feel free to shoot some my way if you need.
Yes, we've got a lot of questions already, and I will remind people, please put your questions in the Q&A instead of in the chat. We'd appreciate that. So the first one is from Shar, who would like to know how you determine the oven time for the different pan sizes that you're using?
You got to practice. Honestly, I did a batch today with each of these rings, and the little one was perfect at about 11 minutes. I wrote them all down over here. But you'll know your oven, and you'll get to know also your pan that you're using. So this batch makes enough for probably at least eight medium-sized cakes. So you can do that and experiment. So by the time you get through making one at a time, you should have it dialed in so that you can do larger production of 4 or 5, 6 or 8 at a time, doing the whole batch.
Very good. And Janice would like to know which kind of chocolate you're using.
This is Valrhona Couverture. This is about a 72%. This is a really rich chocolate, one of my favorites. I think it was from Chef's Zone that we picked that up. And you'll notice that I heated the butter till it was melted and hot. I turned off the heat, removed the pan, and then I threw in the chocolate, kind of constantly stirring it or swirling the pan until the chocolate's fully melted. So that's one of the reasons I do it in the pot, is because I still have the heat of the pot to use to help me melt the chocolate, as opposed to pouring it straight into a bowl. Sometimes the butter's not hot enough to get it all in there and to melt all of the chocolate.
And then just 2 sugar related questions, and I'll leave you to it for a bit if you'd like. Marilyn would like to know if she can reduce the sugar to half a cup.
Yep, absolutely.
No problem. And then G. Roman would like to know, can you eliminate the sugar totally if you like the chocolate a tad on the bitter side?
Yeah, I think you could probably eliminate most of it. It depends on the chocolate that you're using. Different chocolates have different amounts of sugar. So this is a fair amount of sugar that's going into it, but I could certainly reduce that amount. To go zero chocolate, it would depend, zero sugar, it would depend on the chocolate you choose. So I would say you're gonna have to experiment. Don't use bittersweet, or don't use unsweetened. You need some sugar in there, but if it is a bittersweet or above, you'd probably be fine.
Okay, very good. And one last one for now. What Lana would like to know, what is the diameter of your favorite bottomless ring mold?
Well, for this one, it was about 2 inches and about 1.5 inches high is probably the standard one. Because it's AARP and we're doing fast, healthy, and Ono, you might go with the smaller one. And this one is about 1.25 inches, and it's about 1.75 inches high. So that would be up to you. It doesn't really matter. And then when you're adding the batter to the ring mold, we use a scoop, because I'll show you it does set up when it's cold, and it allows us to then just scoop it inside. So great question.
Thank you.
And I'm just stirring the eggs in. And you'll notice I took it out of the pot because the pot would still be hot, and I don't want to scramble the eggs. So I want it to get incorporated, but I don't want it to be so hot that it'll cook the eggs that are going in. And then I'm going to stir in my cornstarch.
Chef, what's the measurement for your egg beater eggs, if you were to use those?
It would be equal. What I had here was 4 yolks and 4 whole eggs. A whole egg, a whole large egg is 2 ounces. So that would have been 8 ounces of whole eggs, and a yolk weighs about 1 ounce. So it's usually about equal parts. So that would, for egg beaters, that would have been 12 ounces total.
12 ounces. And Patricia was wondering, she said you use what looks like buttons for the chocolate. Can you use chocolate bars or chocolate chips?
Absolutely. You can use any kind of chocolate you want. Your favorite chocolate bar would work perfect. You could even get one that has like chili peppers in it, or it has orange zest, or, the batter we're doing tonight is just a nice basic neutral one, but you could easily season. You want to add a pinch of cinnamon, you want to add a chocolate that's your favorite brand, or it has something in it. There's no problem there. I will say I tried to do it with white chocolate, and the yolks made it turn a little bit too yellow, so it didn't really hold the white. So you want to keep that in mind. And then I'm just stirring that until it's all mixed together. And you can see how thin this batter is. And what we did today is we baked some immediately with the warm batter. In the recipe, I recommend that you chill it just like I did here, because you can see the consistency of the batter here is very thin. And then once it's chilled, I've got the batter here. It's like chocolate ganache. So let's see if you can see how it sets up. So what we had happen when we were doing it warm, just straight into the oven, it sort of bled out around the bottom of the ring mold. So if you're doing ring molds, you're definitely going to want to chill it like this before you put it in the ring mold. If you're using a souffle cup that you might spray and line with sugar or dust it with flour, you could go straight in with the batter as is, because it's not going to leach out on the bottom.
I have 3 questions for you regarding cornstarch.
Yes.
So the first one's from Shar. Is the cornstarch sifted?
It should be sifted, yes.
Okay.
And it should be fresh. Make sure that there's not a bunch of lumps in it and it's not old, because you can end up with the lumps then in your batter.
Right. And what does the cornstarch do to the cake? Allison is wondering.
It helps bind it. That's a great question, Allison, and absorb some of that moisture. So you do want some binding. The eggs will coagulate, but you also want some binding action, like in a regular cake, and you will get that from the cornstarch. Actually, some cakes will actually call for cornstarch and flour mixed, but it will help give it structure when you're baking it.
Okay. And Dana would like to know, how do you prevent lumps after you add the cornstarch? And Linda wanted to know how much cornstarch you're using.
Let me see the recipe I have here, 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. And earlier today, the cornstarch that I had was old. And that's why I'm saying make sure that it's fresh and it's sifted. And I had some lumps of cornstarch in there. So what we did, we took an immersion blender and we blended it slightly and it worked out. You can also take a spatula like this one and kind of press the batter against the side and it'll smash the cornstarch. Now, if you use some older cornstarch and you put it together and you find that there's lumps in there, you could also run it through a strainer. That would be no problem. When you push it through that sieve or that strainer, it's going to remove those lumps. But great question. And then you can, of course, taste the batter, make sure this is, the flavor you're looking for, especially if you're making modifications to the sugar content. There's nothing wrong with taking a taste of the batter. If you want to add a little orange extract or some other form of flavoring, this is the time to do it.
Okay, so Florence was wondering, why do you mix the egg whites and the egg yolks separately?
They were just separated. The way we had it on the tray when we scaled the recipe, it called for 4 eggs and those were cracked into 1. And then the yolks, it calls for 4 yolks and they were put in a different vessel. So you could easily put them together. You could even stir them and whisk them a little bit in advance before you put them in. Totally up to you. It was Chef Steve that set up the tray for me today, and that's the way he did it. So I just say, yes, Chef Steve, you did the right thing.
And a couple of people want to know how long you chilled the butter for.
The butter was room temperature, so I didn't chill it at all.
Okay.
And I'm looking at my batter and I'm checking this out. I can see it's oozing. I don't want that. This is not what I'm looking for, ideally, but give that a shot. And I'm going to make one of these in a small ramekin, just so we have that as well. I'm not sure why that ring oozed out like that today. I didn't have that issue earlier.
Okay, so Jarrett's wondering how long you chill the butter, not the batter. Pardon me, how long you chill the batter, not the butter.
Oh, the batter. Oh, thank you. The batter, we made that today at about probably 12 o'clock. So it took maybe 3 hours to chill. If you put it in the freezer and let it set up, it'll chill even more quickly.
Great.
But this one's not quite set. I don't have room in the oven. Actually, I'm going to pull this out and I'll just pop this back in. It's
Chef,
set up
can you use arrowroot instead of cornstarch?
You could try arrowroot. Actually, you could probably try any starch you want, tapioca, cornstarch, even like I said, flour you could use. This is gluten-free when we're using the cornstarch, so we don't have to necessarily worry about that. But any of those, rice flour would work. Any starch kind of as a binding agent would work fine for that. Yeah, no problem. And as that's coming up, how you serve it is kind of another thing that's up to you. We've already got the sweetness that we need when we're talking about the batter and the cake itself. And then for the garnish, I mean, traditionally, and many of you have probably been to Roy's, it's like 3 of the brandied cherries, or it used to be when I worked there, with a scoop of ice cream on top, and then raspberry sauce oftentimes. So it's up to you to decide what you'd like to serve with it. I just got some low-fat cherry yogurt. So to stay sort of away from the ice cream, or you could go with a low-fat ice cream or frozen yogurt if you want that contrast in temperatures. But coming out here, I don't have a freezer, so we're just using a nice yogurt.
Now, Chef, since you brought up Roy's Molten, which if anyone's had Roy's Molten, it's to die for. Becky was wondering, the burning question, what chocolate does Roy's use?
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. It's a quality chocolate, I can tell you that. I'm not really sure what they're using today. I spent time in the kitchen there in the late 90s. And at that time, it was a French chocolate. I believe it was Valrhona. The quality of the chocolate makes a huge difference when you're talking about the finished product. So, Roy tends to do everything first class. So I'm sure he's got a quality chocolate in there that he's using today. But even, Hawaiian Vintage, there used to be some chocolate companies in Hawaii. Now they're starting to come back. There's a one towards the North Shore. So really any good quality chocolate's going to work for you. Hershey's chocolate chips can work as well. It's just a question of how much money you want to spend. But I couldn't tell you exactly what chocolate he's using. I wouldn't want to misrepresent what he's doing over there. And then, so I put the yogurt on the plate and I just added a little bit or a streak through that. And then I've got some cherry compote that I'm going to put down.
Let me know when you're ready for more questions,
Yeah,
Chef.
feel free anytime. Yeah, go
great.
ahead.
Just let me know when you want me to stop because there's lots of them.
No, you just keep going. That's fine.
Okay. So Becky was wondering, where can you buy the molds? Where would you recommend?
These molds I've had for so long. That's a really good question. I would say, obviously online, if you look for ring molds, you can find ring molds that come in cake sizes and all the way down. It just sort of depends. Metal scratch. But the places in town that I recommend is Bar Green, Ellison, Sand Island. They tend to do a lot of restaurant equipment, so you can get equipment there. That works well. But I would say, depending on the size you're looking for, you might want to look online.
Right. And do you recommend that if someone's using ramekins, that they're greased?
If someone's using ramekins, what? I'm sorry, the last
grease the ramekin as well as
I would always grease the ramekin. So we have maybe these are the spirits telling me the healthier portion needs to be smaller. Because you can see half of my batter oozed out onto the pan. It's still delicious. I'll eat that.
I was going to say, still very edible, right?
Yeah, it works. This is what we feed the health.
And Jackie's not around today, so they get even more.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And can you add nuts to this recipe?
Absolutely. Yeah, you could add really anything you want to this recipe, no problem.
Okay, and John had an interesting question. He says, if I add chili chocolate Kahlua, do I add it to the chocolate?
Chili chocolate Kahlua. Is that a drink? Is that a,
John, is that a drink? I'm assuming it is, and it sure
yeah, it's a chili
sounds
chocolate
good.
Kahlua. It sounds like a cocktail. I'll take one, please. It sounds delicious. Um, you can add, you just have to be careful with what you're adding in terms of liquids because it'll thin the batter. That may be part of the issue here. Or the seal. I have not used, actually, these aren't the ring molds that I normally use for this particular cake. I use these here. And because it's larger and it's made for a different type of pan, I didn't check. Maybe it has a puka in the bottom where the seam is that allows that to run out. But yeah, as long as you're not going crazy and adding a bunch of liquids and things that might throw off the ratio, you should be fine. But if you experiment with it, you could probably come up with the right amount.
It sounds fantastic. Erica was wondering if for some reason her lava cake falls, what can you do with it other than calling us to come and eat up those bits? Because I'm sure they'll still be good. Other than trashing it, any troubleshooting tips that you have?
Yeah, I would never trash it. And you can see here, it's shorter than I expected. And that might be in part, like I said, to the size of it. So if you're going with a larger portion, it's probably best to go with a vessel that's going to hold it in so you don't have to worry about it, and then just serve it in that or gently turn it upside down. So never throw it away. It's going to be fine. This could be dusted with powdered sugar. I could have put the cherry compote on top. I could do a lot of different presentations with it, but it's never something that needs to be thrown away. It's just really a matter of practicing with your oven. And if you make that batch like we have here, and spend an hour with the different size molds and figuring out your oven and the temperatures, you'll have it dialed in so that you'll be able to execute it perfectly every time. So I don't recommend you invite guests over and try this for the first time, like I am today. But it can work. And you can see here, that's the idea behind the cake. And I'll put it up here, so hopefully this one shows a little bit closer. I don't have that particular view. Does that work, Alice? Can you see that cake? Oh, that one's off.
We've lost your other view.
Oh, the other view will come back on here in a second. But you can see the center of the batter is still hot. It's molten. It's running out. You can see here a little bit better, I think.
There. Perfect. Yeah.
I can set it here. For me, ideally, I like to see it taller and more. So you get more batter. This ended up being about, yeah, it's hard to tell on your view probably, but it's only like 3/4 to 1 inch high, where I prefer to see it about 2 inches high. So working that would be fine, but you still at least have the nice molten center. And you can see that it's just basically like a chocolate sauce that's coming out of the middle. Now let me look at a couple of these other ones. Taste delicious. That little ramekin that I made should not take long at all. When you're doing something small like that, works out great. You just have to be careful if you're handling the dishes that are hot. It can be a little tricky. So make sure that you use a towel. Don't burn your hands.
By the way, that was a liqueur. John clarified for us. It is
Okay.
a Kahlua liqueur.
Yeah, that sounds great. I've not heard of that one before, but it sounds like something I would like.
Yeah, and I'll look for it. So a few people are asking, how do you test for doneness, or can you, of this cake?
You can't really test for doneness when you're baking it. I mean, you can put something in it, but it cooks so quickly that it's hot that for the most part, you just got to bake it for those depending on the size, 8 to 12 minutes, and take it out, let it rest a little bit, and plate it, and then check it. So you want it to cool just enough to where you can sort of handle it, but you don't want to, you can't really take a cake tester and stick it in there, because the ultimate goal is to have it nice and moist and runny in the center. And then when you have something that's a little bit smaller, you can top it with the cherry filling or something like that.
Lana was wanting to know how you make the cherry compote.
Yeah, it's just canned cherries. They're starting to come into the stores now. You can actually buy them, and just take the pits out, a little bit of water, a pinch of sugar when you bring them to a boil, and thicken it with cornstarch. And that's how you make just like a simple sauce for cherries. These were canned, but I did see them, I think, last week in the store. They're coming around now.
Napualani was wanting to know, can you freeze the extra batter that you have if you have extra batter?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, that would work great. This batter would work perfectly for that. I would, that container that I had, which was a 2-cup container, was about the equivalent of what we made. When you're finished, you end up with just a little bit short of 2 cups total. So I would probably put it in 2 individual 1-cup Tupperwares before I freeze it. That way it will thaw out a little bit quicker, and you can use half at a time instead of having to use the whole batter and thaw it out first. So. On the sauce with the cherry filling, turning out beautiful. And you can see that once this, the molten center runs out and cools, it almost is like the chocolate sauce that you would serve with the dish. So that's really one of the advantages to this, is you get that, the sauce is built into the cake itself. So it's a little bit more advanced. It takes a little bit of practice, but I think if you go with a vessel like this that's enclosed, and you start there and you get a chance to practice with it a couple times, and then try the ring molds, it's really kind of fun once you get it dialed in. You just got to make sure that your guests are at the table when they're ready to come out of the oven. So super important in that regard, for sure. And then these should be coming out shortly. I'll keep an eye on those. Were there any other questions?
Yes, actually there are. So Nelson would like to know, what kind of sugar do you use for lining your dish? Are you using powdered sugar?
Great question. For this one, if you're lining it so that you're turning it out, you use granulated sugar.
Okay, very
that
good.
Will form sort of a crust. And what you want to do is lightly spray it. Sometimes people will do melted butter or oil, but we just use spray, and then granulated sugar, swirl it around, tap off any excess, and then it'll create a barrier that will allow the cake not to stick. It pops right out afterward.
Is that your avocado spray you're using, or a different kind of spray?
Not tonight. This is just a regular vegetable spray.
Okay.
I probably could. I don't think you would actually get the flavor. It might even be nice. I've made this type of cake before with olive oil. It makes it a little bit more savory, kind of subtle. But whatever spray you use at home, don't go buy a special spray just to spray the liners for this particular dish. Whatever you have at home would work. And if you only use margarine or something, you can just melt a little bit of that and use a brush or a paper towel to wipe it out and coat it, and then dust it.
And then dust it. So two egg questions. One, is it 4 large eggs plus 4 more egg yolks?
That is correct.
Okay. And do you have any suggestions to use up those egg whites, the remaining egg whites?
Oh, that's a great question. Traditionally, and on the dessert side, it's used in meringues and things. But if you're doing any sort of meatloaf or like sausage filling, we've made a number of sausage fillings over the last year. We can certainly do that. And that's a binding agent in there. That's probably one of the main, those are two of the main areas that I would use them up in. Or you can just simply scramble them up and have a healthy omelet without the yolks.
Which is really good, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
And can you use 6 eggs, about 12 ounces, instead of 4 eggs and 4 egg yolks?
Yes, yes, you can. Yeah,
Good to know.
absolutely. You get a little bit more binding from the whites than you do from the yolks, so that would reduce your fat content. And you've got enough emulsion power with the yolks that are there. So I would say that that's not a problem at all.
Great. And Catherine wants to know, could she use muffin tins?
You can use muffin tins. Getting them out would be a little tricky. Only because, there might be 6 in a muffin tray. And what you would probably then want to do if you had a muffin pan is to spray it, of course, dust it with granulated sugar, bake them. And then when you take it out of the oven, put a pan over the top and then hold the two together and gently turn it over so that as you lift off the muffin tin, the muffins would stay on the pan, and then you could transfer them to the plate.
Okay. And one last question here for now from Helen. Do you have to preheat your countertop oven?
Yes, you do. This one was preheated. Actually, I set it for an hour prior to class, and I turned it on about 15 minutes prior to the show starting. So it was on for about 25 minutes before I put that first one in. So yeah, you definitely want to make sure that that's the case. And then if you think about and back up to the ingredients that we have, we've got the eggs, we've got the chocolate. The different chocolates are going to have varying amounts of cocoa fat, and the lecithin's the same. The sugar may vary, but the cocoa mass will be different. So as you experiment with this recipe, you can adjust the sugar, you can vary the type of chocolate that you use. You could also, like I said, add a little extra cornstarch. You could do the rice flour. This would be more mochi-like if we had rice flour, so that might be actually really good. So just experiment. If you find that it's too thin, and I'm looking at the ones in here, and I don't know why they ran out. They're running out here. I didn't have that issue earlier. But maybe there's a problem with the pan that I put them on. I'm just thinking of what's taking place. If the pan isn't level and it's warped and you put a ring mold on it, then it's going to have an area for that batter to flow out. So different things like that you have to take into account. So like I said, it may be a little bit of practice, but it's well worth it once you get this recipe dialed in.
And what was that oven temperature again?
This was at 350. And yeah, I'm listening for the fan, but I don't hear it. Normally it has a fan going on. So it may be on its last leg. This little workhorse has done a good job for us, but it's not working out well for me tonight, but that's okay.
Oh, no. And if you chill the batter, should you use it cold or do you need to bring it to room temperature?
Use it cold. That's another thing. And in the recipe, I put on there that the chilled batter helps it to cook from the outside, and then it takes a little bit longer for that heat to come to the center so that the center stays a little bit more raw. That will assist you in creating more of a molten type of cake if your batter is cold. It definitely helps. And whether it's in a bowl or a souffle cup or whether it's in a ring mold, doesn't matter. Either way, it's going to be better if the batter is a little bit cold, because you want that uncooked batter in the middle. And if it's cold, it takes longer for that heat to penetrate and to cook those eggs. Cool. Any other questions?
No, there's no other questions except, the only other one was about recipes for egg whites, but I think we kind of covered that, like an egg white omelet or something like that. Yeah.
And, eggs are running about 30 cents a piece. So, there's different things that you could do. There may be some neat recipes that you could run across online. or you could incorporate them into some other recipe that
Or make a
you're
meringue
baking
for
or
something.
cooking. Yeah.
Yeah. And Beth wants to know how many calories to this dessert. I guess it would depend on the size that you're
It depends on the size of the bite you take. I would say. I didn't do the nutritional breakdown for that, but that's a good question. I would say for the small ring mold one, where we're dealing with probably about 2.5 ounces, that's probably going to be like 375 calories, probably about the equivalent 350 or between 340 and probably 375, equivalent of like a chocolate bar, candy
So if I
bar.
can make a small shameless plug here, we offer AARP Zumba Gold for older adults every Tuesday. So that's a good way to work off some of these calories, I think. So please
Yeah, there
join
you
us for
go.
that. You can register the usual way. Janice is asking, how long will the egg whites last in the refrigerator?
Great question, Janice. I keep them for up to a week, no problem, in the refrigerator. If you want to keep them longer, then you're going to want to freeze them. Just put them in a little deli cup and put them in the freezer, a Ziploc bag or something, but they'll last for months in the freezer, no problem. And they'll actually whip up just fine and function just like a regular egg white. We buy 5-gallon buckets of egg whites frozen and use them all the time in the bake shop.
Wow. And just one last one here. A number of people have been saying, so you fill the batter halfway up the vessel, correct?
Yeah.
You're going about halfway up.
Yeah. You will get, it will rise up, assuming it's not leaking out the bottom. It will souffle up and you'll get almost really close to double in height. So, you want to, usually the best rule of thumb for baking and filling pans is 3/4. So if you go, 3/4 full, you should be pretty safe. If you're using a souffle cup like this, these are the traditional ones that are round and they've got like fluted edge on the side. And then on the inside, it kind of tapers out so that as something rises up, it has a little excess room to spread towards the top. So that's not necessary, but I would never go more than 3/4 full if you're doing a dish that has a bottom.
Well, Dana, if we're waiting for those, maybe I'll just quickly mention to people that we will be back again on Thursday, June 17th. Taking a couple of weeks off. I think Chef definitely deserves it. So I'll go into a little bit more of that in a minute. I see that you've pulled these out now, so we're ready to get back to you, and I'll let everybody know about the other things during the close.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll just check these out. I apologize. I can see, I know why now. Now they're leaking. I can see. It's not that my pan is bent. It's that the heat is warping it. So I have these cute, this oven only fits certain pans, and I found some neat little ones today, or what I thought were neat little ones. And I even doubled it so that it wouldn't burn. But what I'm noticing is the pan is like, it's not level. It heated up and warped, which allowed the batter to run out. So there you go. It didn't do that with one. It wasn't an issue with one small one earlier, but apparently it's an issue with 3. So that we solved the mystery at least. That's good to know. So I can take one of these. There are 3 different sizes here. So we see if we got time. I'm sorry, I'm running a little late. I can see if I can get the ring molds off, get them on the plate, and then we can see where the centers are. Be careful. My wife says my fingers are like all calloused up and like oven mitts, I guess. And now you know why. I'm always picking up things like this. There's 2. And get the 3rd one out. And then when you do it, if you're using parchment, then you can just remove the paper. It'll come out from the side, no problem. This one looks like it leaked the least, the middle one. And the little, this is almost like a brownie bite, the one on the end. So I think most of these baked a little bit long. So I can see some raw batter there flowing out, but not a whole lot. I was talking too much. So that should have been under. And then it, had it not bled out, it would have been the perfect height, then that would have been ideal. But the other thing to keep in mind is even if this is baked all the way through, it makes a delicious flourless cake. It's dense and it's moist. It's really, really nice. But at least this one turned out. So 1 out of 4, I guess, isn't too bad. So were there any other questions, Deb?
No, there's no other questions. I think everybody's probably just looking at that and drooling right now, as I am.
All right. Well, one thing I would say then from the lesson we learned here is don't use a thin baking sheet if you're going to do multiple ones with a ring mold. Then make sure that you get a sheet. Normally we just bake with a pan like I showed you here. This is a thicker aluminum one, and we never have issues like that. I recall in at Roy's, we used just the small pizza pans. So you can get the little round aluminum pans, but they're thick because they're designed to do pizza in an oven that's really hot. So those hold up without flexing and warping a little bit. So keep that in mind if you're going to go for the ring mold style of cake.
Well, we do have one last question from Angie. She's wondering if there's any danger of salmonella with tasting the raw batter.
No, I would say no. Now, most of the egg, well, not most, but many of the eggs that you get today are pasteurized. The ones we have here are actually from Waimanalo Farm. They're a little bit large as well. So with this particular recipe, we're using large eggs, and you can look for the ones that are pasteurized. But I've never had an issue with that, and we taste them all the time. I think the sugar content in the batter can help offset that as well. But I would say you're safe to go ahead and taste the batter, no problem.
Terrific. Well, I think that's about it, Chef, unless you've got anything else you'd like to share with us.
No, it's just hard to eat one piece. You know,
and I really hope everybody tries this because I think it'd be a lot of fun to try. And we've gotten some great tips today, which have been fantastic. So I'd like to say thank you to Chef again, and enjoy your 2 weeks. Hopefully you'll get, we're going to miss you. I'll tell you that.
Well, we got some great stuff coming up. We're doing some healthy baking in June, and that's some great stuff for July and beyond. So thanks to everyone for tuning in, and thanks to Craig and Jackie and Dave, everybody. Bev, you guys do such a great job. We appreciate being able to provide the service to the community.
Well, we certainly appreciate you. And of course, Alice, your wife, always helping us out behind the scenes. Sometimes your face gets in front of the scenes a little bit, but
I'll turn the
give
camera.
us a wave. Yeah, there she is. Great help too. Right. And thanks, David, for your help on this one as well. So I'm just going to quickly show you a couple last things that we've got going on here. So thanks again to Chef. And yes, so we'll be back on Thursday. We'll be back to Thursdays again, starting on June the 17th. We're going to be doing the baking with a healthy twist. And we've got at least a couple of those sessions going. So that'll be on the 17th, the one after. I apologize for the wrong date at the in the body of that. I had some technical difficulties today. So I do apologize. Also on when my screen wasn't showing, I looked like Jackie, which I think was a definite improvement. So anyways, but it was me, it's Bev. But I want to thank everybody very, very much. Jackie has already sent out the list or an email to you on the July Fast, Healthy, and No Cooking. If you didn't get it or you've missed it, don't worry, she will be resending it again. So thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Thank you, and we'll see you again, and happy, healthy eating. Aloha.